where you're watching your favorite show and it becomes really clear that they're starting to just rehash the same plot devices over and over and over again. And it becomes really clear that they are actually out of fresh thinking, out of fresh ideas, and they are just trying to do whatever they can to keep the show going for another season. That's the feeling that I'm starting to get every time the United States starts talking about peace in Ukraine. Because this is not the first time we've been through this rodeo. The United States has now proposed peace deals for Ukraine several times, and they typically all have the same theme. The theme of Ukraine conceding land to Russia, essentially giving up, just quitting on their war, and walking away and going home. And every time the United States brings these same terms to the table, surprise, surprise, they get rejected again because they are a non-starter for Ukraine. Not because Ukraine is stubborn, but because Ukraine is realistic. They know that they have been invaded by an enemy country for really no reason. They know that if they just stop fighting, they're just going to have to continue fighting in a couple of years. And so they would rather keep fighting now, accept reality, embrace reality, and grit their teeth and do what they have to do to achieve victory. Nevertheless, every time this happens, people start to get very nervous. Every time, for example, the Trump administration talks about forcing Ukraine into a peace deal, people start to get really nervous that Ukraine is going to kind of be strong-armed into accepting something that they don't want to do. So that's why I wanted to create this video again, because I've created this video like every 6 months for the past several years or so to explain why this is not actually going to happen. Why the United States actually does not have any leverage to force a peace in Ukraine, at least not the way they're currently doing it, and why if the United States really does want peace in Ukraine, there is a path for them to take, but it's to do the exact opposite of what they've tried many, many times that has always failed. So first, let's talk about the very basics of deal making, the art of the deal. In order to get something out of somebody, you need to do one of two things. You first need to offer them something that is so good they want to accept it. Or you need to be able to threaten punishment that is going to be so bad that they have to accept what you're doing to avoid consequences. These are really the only two types of leverage that you can have, the rough and raw kinds of leverage that you can have, especially when it comes to ending a war, if that is really the United States goal. And the reason this is really important to point out is because what few people realize is that the United States does not have either of those things over Ukraine, and they never have throughout the entire war. And it's not because they don't have the potential to have those things. They definitely have the potential to have both of those things. But they have specifically chosen to not put themselves in a position where they could actually have that kind of leverage. And yet they are still trying to demand things as if they have given more than they've really given. So the United States, we often go out on the world stage and we think we can get whatever we want because, for example, we have the most powerful military and the most powerful economy in the entire world. And those are definitely two very big bargaining chips. But what we fail to realize is that just having those things doesn't actually make them useful in getting other people to do stuff that we want them to do. The only way these bargaining chips work is if we are actually using them. And in the case of Ukraine right now, what a lot of people don't realize is that the United States is not giving any meaningful support to Ukraine at all at this point in the war. At this point in the war, the United States is only doing one major thing that's of unique value to Ukraine. They are producing weapon systems that only they can produce that are being purchased by European countries and then given by those European countries to Ukraine. The United States is not currently giving any major weapon systems to Ukraine for free. We're not giving super meaningful aid to Ukraine for free. Nothing like that. And the weapon systems that we are providing to Ukraine indirectly, well, they're not valueless, and I never want to say that. They are not the primary weapon systems that are the most important for the way that the war is actually being fought today. Early on in the war, Ukraine was extremely dependent on Western aid. They were extremely dependent on US weapon systems. But at this stage in the war has progressed into drone warfare, where the primary front lines are being fought by drones. Even the night raids are being done by drones on both sides, and the defense against those night raids is now primarily being done by drones. And all of these things are things that Ukraine is producing themselves. And in fact, Ukraine is producing the exact type of equipment they need. They are producing equipment that no other country in the world can produce. And most of the weapon systems that they're producing themselves are being produced in surpluses, meaning they don't need to import them from any other country. They make more than enough for their own use on their own. And so right now, the United States, when we go to Ukraine and we tell them that we are going to force them to end their war against Russia, we are basically telling them we are already not going to we are already not giving you anything of value. And if you do not concede to these demands, we are going to continue not giving you anything of value. That is obviously a non-starter. Even at times where the United States was giving meaningful support in the exact categories that Ukraine needed. Early on in, Trump's term, where we weren't maybe even giving these, but that we at least had the potential to give these. Our leverage at that point was not enough to get Ukraine to give up on their desire to defend their own country. As the year has progressed, Ukraine has taken things more and more into their hands. They have now launched the Flamingo missile, the Long Neptune, and again, their drone capabilities have only exploded. And if Ukraine was not willing to accept US peace terms that completely and intentionally ignored Ukraine's demands for peace at that time, why would Ukraine now choose to accept US peace terms at this point in the war when they're getting even less value from the United States, where the United States has even less bargaining chips? Now, I might sound a little bit sarcastic in all of this, and yes, I'm kind of oversimplifying things, but my point is just to show clearly that the United States proposition right now is obviously a non-starter for Ukraine. There were times when Ukraine was far more dependent on the United States than it is at this exact moment. And at those times, particularly at the very early stages of Trump taking office again, the United States tried to force similar deals on Ukraine, tried to force Ukraine to concede land, etc. You get the picture. At those times when the United States had more leverage, Ukraine already said no. No, thank you. We appreciate the offer, but we're going to continue fighting to defend our own freedom, even if you don't want to get involved. And this was at a period of time where the United States was on the precipice of potentially providing major aid to Ukraine that actually would have been a game changer. Now, none of that is true. At the most, the United States is providing intelligence, things that is valuable that Ukraine could also get on its own or via their European partners. There is nothing that the United States is uniquely providing to Ukraine. And because of that, there is nothing that the United States can uniquely do to Ukraine to actually force them to stop fighting the war, unless, a drastic step was taken and the United States took military action against Ukraine, which obviously is never going to happen. So the reason I bring all of this up is to say that if the United States really wants to end the war in Ukraine, what they actually have to do is apply the leverage that they have. They do have the strongest military in the world. They do have the strongest economy in the world. If those things are not at play, they have no leverage to help end this war. With that in mind, if the United States is serious about ending the war, they can apply those things against Russia. They can use the might of their economy to support Ukraine's economy, and then maybe they would have a say over the decisions that Ukraine makes today, because Ukraine would have something to lose if the United States backed out. They can actually apply their military might, not directly to attack Russia. I mean, they could if they wanted to, but they don't have to. They could apply their military might by sufficiently supplying Ukraine and giving them the ability to defeat Russia faster. They obviously don't have to do any of those things, but if they're not going to do any of those things, if they're not actually going to provide the things that would give them leverage of value to make Ukraine want to listen to them, then what they need to do is stop trying to tell Ukraine what to do with their war for their peace and their independence. Every time we pursue these so-called peace deals that are obviously going to be rejected because they've been structured the same way every time and they've been rejected every time, all we do is make ourselves look worse on the international stage for no benefit. We've all heard the common definition of insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And whether or not that's the real definition of insanity, it's still what we're doing. We're doing the same thing over and over again, and we're expecting a different result every time, and obviously that doesn't happen. Long story short, I know a lot of people are worried about the United States forcing Ukraine to accept a bad peace deal. I don't lose any sleep over that, because the United States doesn't have any leverage over Ukraine to force them to do anything. That has already been proven to be true several different times, and the US leverage has only gotten worse